Well, good morning. It's Tuesday, April the 14th. Easter was just 2 days ago. And this week I'm looking at stories of the resurrection and wondering about them a little bit, and hopefully inspiring you to wonder about them just a little bit as well. So I want to look at Mark's gospel and the original ending of Mark's gospel. So it's chapter 16, verses 1 to 8. That's pretty much where the oldest Mark manuscript ends. There's a little bit added later, and I may look at that later this week. But for now, I just want to show you where Mark ends. And Mark tells the resurrection story, the Easter story, like this. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. And they had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" And when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, this is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee, and there you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And all that had been commanded them they told briefly to those around Peter. And afterwards Jesus himself sent out through them from east to west the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. So that's how Mark ends, not just the Easter story, but his whole gospel. After that, there really isn't a need to say anything more. And you might recognize some sort of familiar elements. It's not the same way that John tells the story, the one that we shared yesterday or shared on Easter morning as well. It's not quite the same, and yet Mary comes to the tomb. This time there's three of them. So in John, there's just Mary. But we have this person in white that in John identifies two of them and calls them angels. But here it's just a young man dressed in a white robe. And we are left to imagine for ourselves who this person might be. But as an angel is a messenger from God, angelos, we could do a whole translation thing later. It makes sense that you could call this person also an angel, whether they have wings and appear in This Is a Wonderful Life is beside the point. This person is a messenger from God and says, don't be alarmed, because naturally they're terrified. I can imagine that they're terrified because, well, the stone has been rolled away, so something is afoot. Could be grave robbers who could still be in the neighborhood. That would be frightening. It could be that the things that they had thought could happen but dared not speak aloud, this idea of resurrection, that it could actually be a real thing, that could be happening too. So they are afraid as they look in. In John's story, we had the two disciples doing essentially the same thing, one rushing in but the other holding back. They are afraid. And so this messenger from God, this voice of God, as it were, says, don't be alarmed. I know why you're here. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified. He's been raised. He's not here. Look, this is the place they laid him. As if to say, you haven't come to the wrong place. This is not a trick. Look, this is where they laid him. You recognize that. But he's not here. So go and tell the disciples and Peter, giving him special treatment, go and tell the disciples and Peter that he's going ahead of you to Galilee. In other words, everything he told you is true, and it's going to continue. It's going to happen the way he told you it would. So go. Stop being afraid. Stop believing what the crowd is saying. Stop even believing your eyes that see conspiracy and fear and death all around you. Stop that. Remember what Jesus said. Remember the promise of resurrection. So keep going as he asked you to, and you will see him. it's a lovely story, not quite as dramatic or as fun, perhaps, as John's story of the resurrection, but the elements are there. And what I find particularly interesting is, having met this messenger of God, this young man in white, this angel, and hearing those words, they now know this resurrection is real. The thing that they hoped for but dared not speak aloud, it has happened. So they went out and they fled from the tomb. Fled. They didn't walk away. They didn't skip. They didn't dance joyously. They fled. It's a scary thing when your faith is real and you really experience it. It actually can be a little bit scary because it changes everything. And so they fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, it says. And they said nothing to anyone. They were supposed to go back and tell Peter and the disciples right away, go and do that. But they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. They had a job to do, and yet they were afraid to do it. They fled from the very proof that everything they believed and hoped for was true. And I don't know about you, but I have had those moments when I have felt God's presence so profoundly it almost frightens me. And I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I have experienced it at a deathbed with someone and just feeling something holy happening, and my job is to say a prayer. My job is to bring comfort. I'm a minister, for goodness sakes, whether I'm there professionally or there on a personal level. The thing is, I have a job to do, and yet I've had moments when I've been so overcome by that holy sense of time and space. In that moment, I have been struck dumb, and I have been afraid to speak for fear that I might say something stupid, or that I might ruin the moment. And there's a part of me that from time to time has wanted to run from the room and just go back to my house, go back to my way of being, go back and get myself safe, because brushing up against the holy, it changes everything. I understand what was happening for Mary and Salome, I think. I understand why they didn't say anything. And I think if you think about it, you might understand it too. Many of us have a faith. We have a faith that we believe in, and we're a little bit reluctant to share it because, man, what if we say something stupid? What if we're talking to somebody who knows more about faith than we do? Not more about our faith, but they know more about the faith. And we're going to talk to them, and we're going to look silly. I have met some great theologians in my time, and you don't really want to talk theology. Here's your chance, for goodness sakes. But you don't want to, because you're going to reveal that you didn't read that person's last book, or you're not current on the way we talk about the Trinity now, or you haven't found this new thing, and you don't want to look foolish, and so you don't say anything. But I am encouraged by the fact that ultimately they say a little something, right? It says, and all that had been commanded them, they told briefly to those around Peter. They didn't necessarily go right to Peter, but they went to the other disciples, the other apostles, and they said, okay, I know you're going to find this hard to believe, but we were at the tomb, and he's not there. And there was like an angel who told, I know this sounds crazy. So they don't want to tell all of it, but they want to try a little bit. So they try a little bit. And what's amazing is Mark tells us that Jesus himself sent out through them from east to west the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. They were incapable, they believed, of sharing the power, the beauty, the promise, the peace of faith. They couldn't communicate what had happened with the resurrection, and so they didn't want to do anything. But when they dared to do a little bit, right? When they told them briefly what had happened, Jesus himself sent through them from east to west the sacred and imperishable proclamation of eternal salvation. That is to say, all of the faith is communicated, not by those of us who know everything and can explain it, but by those of us who will speak briefly to another person about what they've experienced, what they've felt, what they've wondered. And in carefully, even tentatively sharing that, the other person engages and their faith begins to grow. And it's a whole bunch of us who are a little bit afraid sharing what we believe with each other. And there's always a chance that they're going to ask us to shut up. There's always a chance that they are going to be hurting and they don't want to hear our words, and then we feel bad because we couldn't fix things for them. There's always a chance that they're going to know more about the formal faith than we do, and we feel foolish. But Mary still shared her story briefly to those around Peter, carefully, tentatively, and in that the fullness of faith was actually communicated. Because when you and I dare to talk to other people, when we dare to talk to each other, that's where the Word of God happens. That's where faith actually happens. Not because we have figured it out and we're sharing a complete idea, but because we're sharing together, building community, and God takes advantage of those moments and brings real peace, real understanding, real hope. I think that's kind of what resurrection's about too. At least that's how it happens, I think, in community, when we dare to share carefully with each other new life. At least that's what I'm thinking today. We'll see what I'm thinking tomorrow, but thanks for sharing a little time with me. God bless you. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Amen.